We're back from a couple of weeks off after the Olympics, reporting on something that happened before the Olympics. And James Pearson made the first repeat of Dave Macleod's 2008 route, Echo Wall. Now this could rank as the ascent of the year. Perhaps, as far as British trad is concerned, even global trad, perhaps the biggest repeat of the last 10 years. This is major, major news. Echo Wall has always had an air of mystery around it. It lies high up on the north face of Ben Nevis, so it's not easily accessible. And, lying where it does, in Scotland, it's also prone to just about the worst weather imaginable. Within the film Echo Wall, which was produced around the time of the first ascent, you see Dave shoveling snow from on top of the route in order to minimise the seepage coming through it. Now this is just one of the many factors that made that first ascent awkward, and has potentially put off future ascensionists. There's reports of the likes of Steve Macleod going up there on 2 separate occasions to try the route, and never having got on the route because it was out of condition. So as if conditions weren't enough, there's also the matter of its difficulty and the danger attached with it. This is a route which, whilst not being given a British grade, was given a proposed French 8C for its difficulty. And then when it comes to the danger, this is about as dangerous as routes get. Whilst it may not be a solo, the protection was minimal, it was blind, and some of the skyhooks, which aren't even a reliable form of protection, were behind loose, creaky flakes. You wonder why anyone would want to repeat it. But this has long been on the list for James Pearson. It is arguably the biggest prize in British trad climbing because of that air of mystery around it, whilst there are many hard routes within Britain that are lumped together in terms of difficulty. Your likes of Lexicon, your likes of Rhapsody, both at E11. Echo Wall was always considered to be that next league above. Nobody knew how hard it was, aside from that footage within the original film that just looked harrowing. When Dave Macleod made the first ascent, he had climbed Rhapsody, the world's first E11, 2 years prior, and considered Echo Wall to be a significant step up. And this is what he had to say about it at the time. This thing is just not the same as something like Rhapsody. The climbing on that was quite tricky. At the time, it was my limit, but it was right there. Easy to sling a rope down in a few minutes and get climbing on it with nothing in the way. Echo Wall is different. The mix of 8C or harder climbing, the prospect of a ground fall on the lead, and the logistical challenge of climbing this so high on the north face of the bend. That is why it will be another level and beyond to other routes. Whilst Dave left it ungraded in terms of the British grade at the time, last year he announced that he thought it retrospectively would be around E10, which seems pretty stern. The reason was that he believed he might have misjudged the difficulty. So that's the French grade of 8C. And the reason being is because of that sort of fear associated with potentially dying, leading him to think that it was more difficult maybe than it truly was. But these things are hard to tell at the time, and the risk of dying and the potential to fall off of it is very real. James began working the route in late July, and on the 21st he carried all of his kit up to the route in order to start that siege. However, the siege kind of stopped there, as when he returned on the 23rd, he arrived to a gopping wet wall that was completely out of condition and unsuitable to climb. At this point, I have no doubt that James was pretty concerned that this could be representative of each and every attempt he was about to make, and whether or not he was going to write off a summer to the Scottish weather gods. On the 24th, his fortunes changed and he managed to get a good session on the wall, all via top rope and self-belay. He managed to brush the holds, place the gear, and start to link some of the moves. He then returned 2 days later on the 26th, where he managed to link from the knee bar through to the top of the route, completing the head wall and refining his sequence on the lower wall and the crux. He then had 2 further sessions on the 29th and the 30th, refining his sequence, brushing the holds, and figuring out if there was any more gear he could get in to make it as safe as a really dangerous route could be. On the 31st, he managed to climb the entire route free, with pre-placed gear, with the top piece backed up by a piece of static rope. Now he claimed that this was easier than top roping it, would you believe? But it led the way towards placing all the gear on lead, which he did the following day. So by this point, it is his 4th day on and only his 6th session on the route. An incredibly quick repeat, but in that true, methodical James Pearson style. Sharing the news on social media, James simply had to say, just topped out the mythical Echo Wall. Phew, that was a big one and means a lot. More info to follow after we get all of our stuff off of the mountain. And there will have been a lot of stuff. Now the obvious question with this previously ungraded route now having been repeated is, what grade did James think it was? Now some people like grades, some people hate grades, but there's definitely been some big question marks about Echo Wall over the years. It is probably Britain's most mysterious trad route, believed to be the hardest within the UK. And when it came to the breakdown, James had this to say about it. I'd suggest a very similar sport grade breakdown to Dave, with the bottom wall feeling about 8A+, to a good rest at the roof, and the upper wall about 8A+ or 8B. If you punch those numbers into Darth Grader, the physical challenge of Echo Wall might be somewhere between hard 8B and 8B+, which matches with my own internal dialogue that it might be 8B or 8B+ to top rope and hard 8B to lead, placing all the gear. Now when it comes to the gear, James had a very different approach to Dave, placing significantly more. Lower down where Dave placed 1 cam, James placed 2. Around the roof where Dave placed 1 RP, James placed 2. But most significant of all, on the upper head wall where Dave placed just 2 pieces of gear, James managed to place 7. Now, there are maybe those out there thinking this changes the nature of the route, but this is the nature of trad. You've got to whittle in the gear as and when you can, and there's no limit to the amount you place as long as you can find the placements to place them in. Now the other caveat to that is the amount of time it takes to place these pieces of gear. Now James has described the strenuosity, if that's a real word, of placing these, with some you having to place mid-crux. So finding the time and energy to do that is really significant. In fact, James thought he spent over 10 minutes longer on the route placing gear, which is a long time on such a hard route. James also equalised some of the pieces of gear, tensioning them down to the ground with a 3rd rope that he'd also carried up, which again isn't going to make it easier, but it will crucially make it safer. Finally, when it comes to that British grade, James has suggested the Echo Wall is hard E11. To give that further context in terms of the other E11s that are out there, James has said it's very hard to compare, but if comparing in terms of the physical difficulty alone, Echo Wall is harder than Lexicon, but interestingly easier than Rhapsody, and easier again than Tribe. Although James does highlight that he now climbed Rhapsody over 10 years ago, and is arguably a very different climber now to the one he was back then, being someone who's probably on the form of their life, having made the first ascent of Bon Voyage and having the grade of that confirmed by none other than climbing legend Adam Ondra. James also highlighted that when you involve logistics and danger, Echo Wall takes on a new level of difficulty altogether, highlighting that he empathised with the difficulty that Dave must have found himself in all those years ago when he made the first ascent. It's very hard to be objective about a grade with these things. We caught up with James at the North Face Climb Festival in London just before he was due to head north to Scotland to try Echo Wall. And here's what he had to say. So you're back in the UK for a little while. You're going to be basing yourself in Fort William, looking at, Dave Macleod's, what do you call it? Super route, mega route, chop route, Echo Wall.
Yeah, magnum opus, no?
Yeah, because that still holds quite hallowed ground within British climbing culture. Not least, almost because of, despite there being a film around it, the mystery surrounding it, because no one knows really about it.
I'm not even sure that anyone else has actually been on it, just because it's such a logistical nightmare. I mean, I'm probably going to get shouted at by other people that climb on the Ben because it's actually not that hard and the weather's not that bad, but for me, especially someone who now sport climbs in France most of the time, It's a long walk. It's got really, really bad weather, and it's logistically very complicated. So it's been 3 years that I've been wanting to try the route. Last year I came over specifically to try it, but decided to climb elsewhere and nip up to Scotland if the weather ever looked good enough. It didn't. So this year I'm coming, and I'm going to stay in Fort William for a few weeks. I'm just hoping for a couple of days, maybe even just one good day, just to get on the route.
It'd be good to like dispel that myth, and at least if you do it, great, and if you don't, coming back with some knowledge, some detail, some information that you can...
I'd really love just to see the holds, to see the gear, to have a play on some of the moves, to feel whether or not I think it's possible enough, and then, you know, it can become a project for the future. But I'd hate to, and it's a very real possibility that I'm going to go all that way and just sit in the van in the rain.
But you won't be the first to sit in a van in Scotland for a few weeks, and you won't be the last.
So yeah, I'm excited anyway.
Thanks for joining us, James.
Thank you for the chat anyway.
So now that James has climbed Echo Wall, and it's worth repeating that he climbed it in a mere 6 sessions, a seriously quick ascent. He's also made the first ascent of Bon Voyage, arguably the world's hardest trad route. And dare I say it, but he's climbed all of the hardest trad routes in the world. What next for him?